everybody. My name is Connor Flanagan, and I am the Assistant Director here at the Southampton History Museum. Normally, I'm just here doing an introduction for somebody else, but today I will actually be giving the talk myself. Today, my talk is part of our series, Southampton's 20th Century Influencers, and we'll be talking about Jack Dempsey, also known as the Manassa Mauler. So without any further ado, we will go ahead and get started. So before we get into talking about Jack Dempsey himself, I want to break down a little bit about the history of boxing. The sport of boxing has ancient roots. The plaque you see on the screen here is from the British Museum's collection and is dated from between 2000 and 1750 BCE. And it's from either the late Sumerian and the early Babylonian empires, and it depicts two people boxing with other people playing the drums. The other picture we have on the screen here is a bronze Hellenistic Greek sculpture dated between 330 and 50 BCE, and is titled Boxer at Rest, and is presently on display in the Palazzo Massimo al Terme in Rome. And you can see the depiction of him there. He has sort of old school looking boxing gloves, not even really gloves, more so just wraps around his wrists. Also in the ancient world, there was a sport known as Pankration. Pankration is an ancient form of mixed martial arts that traces back to about 2000 BCE, and the name is derived from the Greek words pan, meaning all, and kratos, meaning strength, might, or power. Pankration itself translates to all of the might, and it is said to have been the crowd's favorite competition in the ancient Olympic Games. The terracotta skyphos, or drinking cup that we see here, is from the collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City and is dated from around 500 BCE and shows a pankration competition in action. And on the side, we have the modern day version of it, which is a sport of mixed martial arts. There's a screen capture from a fight from UFC 140, where Frank Mir submitting Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira with a Kimura, or a backward armbar. Getting into boxing, more specifically, this, as we knew it, bare knuckle boxing or prize fighting was almost like a mixture of boxing as we know it today and pankration. Boxing as we know it today dates its lineage back to the 16th century in England, and these fights were bare knuckles and had extremely limited rule sets, which made them very chaotic. Jack Broughton, born somewhere around 1704, he died in January of 1789 and was an English bare knuckle boxer. In 1743, Jack started to introduce rules into the sport of boxing, trying to make it a little less chaotic, bring it away from the inclusion of a lot of the pankration type fights that may occur, and introduced early boxing gloves known as mufflers. In 1853, we saw the creation of the London prize ring rules, which came into place that further established the rules of boxing. This established a size and construction of the boxing ring, outlawing headbutting, eye gouging, biting, as well as many other rules. One thing that was very important about boxing was that it was in this weird legal gray area. The 1882 English case of R.V. Coney found that bare knuckle boxing was an assault regardless of the participant's consent. Also, voluntary attendance as a spectator could support a charge of aiding and abetting the assault. And this started to end the widespread popularity of bare knuckle boxing at the time. So you couldn't just walk down to the circus or down to the street corner and see a boxing match in a theater. These started to move around into more seedy environments. Over here in the United States in 1897, the first instance of film censorship occurred in the United States when several states banned the showing of boxing matches filmed in Nevada, where it was legal at the time. Oftentimes, boxing matches were conducted in, as I said, seedy locations accompanied by gambling, which carried a very negative stigma. But the sport grew in popularity thanks to influential promoters and popular champions like John L. Sullivan. John Lawrence Sullivan was born in Roxbury, Massachusetts, to Irish immigrant parents, and he was dubbed the Boston Strong Boy. He did well academically in school as a child and actually eventually enrolled in the Boston College around 1875 with the goal of becoming a Roman Catholic priest. but then he pivoted to becoming a professional baseball player and then a boxer. Sort of a weird trajectory of his life there. The exact number of fights and sparring sessions that Sullivan had in his lifetime is unknown, but professionally, his record is regarded as 47 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws, and 1 no contest. He became a cultural icon that helped make boxing a popular and legitimate sport in the United States. He won the inaugural World Heavyweight title against Dominic McCaffrey on August 29, 1885, and would defend it multiple times. This is the exact same heavyweight title that British boxer Tyson Fury holds today. The last defense of his bare-knuckle boxing title happened on July 8, 1889 against Jake Kilrain. As you see here on screen, that is them in the midst of their fight. This fight lasted a reported 75 rounds, and that translates to about 2 hours and 16 minutes of combat before Kilrain's corner forfeited the fight for fear that he would die during the fight. The reason that I bring up John Sullivan before getting into the story of Dempsey is that Sullivan himself has a really interesting tie to Southampton. John Sullivan's last fight would be on September 7th, 1892, in a losing effort to James J. Corbett. The fight took place in New Orleans, Louisiana at the Olympic Club, and Sullivan was knocked out in the 21st round. Corbett himself won a $25,000 prize, which today translates to about $750,000. And to train for this fight, Sullivan was here in Southampton over in a little barn by the Canoe Place Inn in Hampton Bays. The barn itself, as you can see pictured there in the middle of your screen, is currently owned by the town of Southampton and houses the Parks and Recreation Administrative Office. So I believe you could head over there and get maybe your beach pass and things like that. And in that barn, which probably looks very different than it did back then, you can see where John Sullivan trained. Julius Keller, the former owner of the Canoe Place Inn, recalled that many boxers who visited CPI over the years would ask to see the barn as almost like a pilgrimage to pay homage to Sullivan. Jack Dempsey himself once visited and said that it was one of the most interesting relics of the sport and he had come across and hoped it would be preserved for future generations. I think it might have been preserved on accident. I don't know if this story is well known. And the Canoe Place Inn itself is under a massive renovation. And a lot of the smaller accessory buildings that had been around the property were changed and moved. But thankfully, this barn was already across the street and being used by the town of Southampton before the restoration happened and continues to stand as is today. But now getting into the story of William Harrison Dempsey. He was born in Manassa, Colorado on June 24th, 1895. His family moved around a lot, with Dempsey spending time both in Colorado, where he was born, and in West Virginia, where his parents were originally from. His parents converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormonism, when he was baptized in 1903 on his 8th birthday. The cabin we see pictured here is the cabin in which Jack Dempsey, or William Harrison Dempsey, was born, and is now a museum dedicated to his life. And growing up, he had a whopping 5 brothers and 5 sisters. His parents, as you see here, are Hiram and Celia Dempsey, where Jack grew up with them, as I said, moving around the country as his father worked various odd jobs. And Jack would eventually drop out of school to work and would leave home at age 16, living the life of a hobo, traveling across the country on trains and staying in hobo camps. To make money, Jack would often go to saloons and challenge the locals to fights and earned a reputation for rarely losing. Dempsey fought his first 15 professional fights under different names, sometimes going as Kid Blackie and other times as Young Dempsey. His first recorded fight was at the age of 19 against someone named Young Herman, which ended in a draw. His 16th professional fight would be against George Copeland in Cripple Creek, Colorado on November 19, 1915. In this fight, Harry, as his family called him, would replace his older brother Bernie, who was almost 40 years old at the time, and after hearing how tough George would be, he didn't want to take the fight anymore and asked his younger brother to replace him. Bernie fought under the name Jack Dempsey as an homage to Irish-American boxer Jack Nonpareil Dempsey. Harry, who would now forever be known as Jack Dempsey, would go on to win via 6-round knockout, And by the end of 1916, just about a year later, Jack's record would expand to 25 wins, 1 loss, 5 draws, and 4 no contests. Fireman Jim Flynn, who we see here, was born in Hoboken, New Jersey on December 24th, 1879. He was a railroad fireman working in Pueblo, Colorado when his boxing career began, and on February 13th, 1917, he would knock out Jack Dempsey in the first round in just 25 seconds. There's been speculation that this fight might have been fixed. However, Jack Dempsey himself denied it heavily. He stated that the issue was that he had neglected to properly warm up for this fight, and the fact that the fight itself began at midnight. In his autobiography, he goes in great detail talking about the day and just his overall just big accident that he made by just walking into the fight without trying to prepare, get ready, not really knowing it's starting, and then before he knew it, he was knocked out. This heavily damaged his career. He lost a lot of stock as a fighter. He lost a lot of confidence, and it would take a few more fights in the spring of 1917 before moving to Tacoma, Washington, to take a job working in a shipyard. It was here that Jack would find himself in a saloon brawl started by several large drunk men, and as he described it, a very fanciful dressed smaller man. After this bar fight, Jack's younger brother Bruce was sadly stabbed to death in their hometown on June 26, 1917, and Jack raced back to his parents' home in Salt Lake City, Utah for the funeral. While there, the fanciful dressed man from the saloon brawl would telegram Jack wanting to work with him. This man was a boxing manager by the name of Jack Doc Kearns. Kearns himself was a former boxer who had turned to managing younger boxers and promoting fights. He offered Jack to move in with him in Oakland, California and start training for fights with the goal of becoming a world champion. Under the tutelage of Kearns, Dempsey would extend his record from 25 wins, 3 losses, 7 draws, and 4 no contests in the summer of 1917 to amazing 56 wins, 4 losses, 9 draws, and 6 no contests by the spring of 1919. In this time, Dempsey would avenge his loss to Fireman Jim by knocking him out in the first round of their rematch in 1918. Kearns would then get Dempsey the biggest break of his career. Jess, the Great White Hope Willard. He was born in Pottawatomie County, Kansas on December 29, 1881, and he was 6 feet 6.5 inches tall and weighed in about 245 pounds. And he began boxing at the age of 27 and was said to be so powerful that he actually killed boxer Jack Bull Young in their 1913 boxing match on accident. He earned the nickname the Great White Hope due to his fight with African-American boxing legend Jack Johnson. Johnson was born in Galveston, Texas in March of 1878 and became the first black man to win a world heavyweight boxing title on December 26, 1908 in Sydney, Australia after defeating then-champion Tommy Burns. This caused major tension around the world and specifically in the United States where segregation was still around and thriving. Johnson would defend his title 9 times and he would eventually lose to Jess Willard on April 5th, 1915 via KO in the 26th round in Havana, Cuba. Willard's name, the Great White Hope, came about due to this victory. All of his fights before this had massive racial tensions. Several ended in riots to the point where he wasn't allowed to fight in the United States anymore because the crowds couldn't be controlled. So a lot of the public put their faith in Jess Willard, calling him the Great White Hope because he was so large as a big country boy to beat Jack Johnson. On July 4th, 1919, in Toledo, Ohio, Willard would have his first defense of the title against Jack Dempsey. Willard stood in, as I said, at a 6 foot 6.5 inches and weighed in at 245 pounds. Dempsey himself was 6'1" and weighed only 187 pounds. Willard was 5.5 inches taller, and there was a 58-pound difference in weight. In his autobiography, Jack Dempsey states, "Standing in the center of the ring with champion Jess Willard, it was one of the most intense moments of my life." Prior to this fight, Willard had never been knocked down. He would be knocked down multiple times in the first round of this fight, however. And at this time, when a fighter was knocked down, the opposing fighter only needed to back off slightly, not go to a neutral corner like many boxers do today. Once Willard's knees were off the canvas and the referee stepped back, Dempsey would be allowed to punch him again as many times as he wanted. Near the end of the round, Dempsey would knock Willard down for the 7th time, and the bell would ring. Dempsey, believing he had won, began to leave the ring and walk to the backstage area. Dempsey and Doc Kearns had placed a bet of $10,000 at a 10-to-1 odd on himself to knock out Willard in the first round. So he probably was heading to the back, excited to collect his payment. But the match actually was not over, as Willard was saved by the bell, and Dempsey's manager, Doc Kearns, then scrambled to run and grab Dempsey, drag him back in the ring for the second round. And here we have newspaper clippings from the July 5th, 1919 New York Times showing the massive crowd, some of the action shots from the fight. Willard would survive 2 more tough rounds, but would not answer the call for the 4th round, giving Dempsey the win in the World Heavyweight title. Initially, Jack Dempsey was seen by many to be a massive star and by being an everyday man who was able to pull himself out of poverty with nothing but hard work. But controversy would soon follow. The color line in boxing is basically something that was known back in this time, where there was a black heavyweight title and a white heavyweight title. Jack Johnson was the first person of color to win the world heavyweight title and remove the color line, but with just Willard taking the title back, and then Jack Dempsey getting the title, many wanted the color line redrawn. In the New York Times article from July 5th, 1919, announcing the win, the very first paragraph states that Dempsey will only give title shots to white fighters. This remark is later rescinded and then reinforced, and this happens several times over the years in many different newspaper articles, with many speculating that Dempsey himself had no issue fighting boxers of any race or color or anything like that, but many promoters and his manager maybe didn't want him to take these fights because of all the issues that boxing got because of Jack Johnson being the champion and the racist attitudes of the United States at the time. There is a legend, however, that Johnson and Dempsey would have a fight, in a gamblers only fight in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada in 1921, shortly after Dempsey won the world title. Johnson had spent about 9 months in jail due to a violation of the Mann Act, which was bringing in women across state lines for immoral acts. And this happened because his wife was a white woman, and so the government went after him. But because of this, Johnson was now in his early 40s. He was in need of money, and while his career was mostly over and he was out of his prime, he was still continuing to take some fights, fight a lot of exhibition bouts, and the idea of this fight happening is very, very possible. Jack Kearns, Dempsey's manager, while being a great boxing manager, was also a massive gambler and kind of just an all-around scoundrel. So the idea of this fight happening at the time where boxing was a less regulated sport is extremely possible. There's only one record of this fight occurring, and that is in the December 11th, 1921 issue of the New York Daily News. And there's a full recount of the fight, and it says that Johnson was actually winning for the first 5 rounds of the fight, and then Dempsey was able to make a small comeback and knock him out in the 7th round. Later in life, Dempsey was questioned about this fight, and while never claiming it to be true, also never said that it wasn't. However, Dempsey would never give a black man a shot at his world title during his reign. One of the other controversies to occur, and probably one of the biggest, was the accusations of Dempsey being a draft dodger. The Selective Service Act of 1917 authorized the United States government to conscript citizens to join the military and allowed some to gain exemptions for various reasons. Dempsey was granted an exemption, claiming he supported his mother, his wife, and invalid sibling. In 1917, when Dempsey had done this, he was nowhere near the world heavyweight champion that he was in 1919. And he was also with his first wife, Maxine Gates, at this time having married her in 1916. Maxine was a prostitute and 16 years his elder. And in Dempsey's autobiography, he talks a lot about the troubles in their marriage and how oftentimes he didn't really even know where she was, where she lived. He traveled a lot for boxing. And so their marriage probably wasn't very much like a traditional marriage. They would end up divorcing in 1919 because of this slacker trial. In 1918, while his manager Doc Kearns was trying to build Dempsey's name up, to get a title shot against Jess Willard, he took him to a shipyard where he posed for photographs trying to drum support for people to go to work to support the war effort. In these photos, you can see Jack Dempsey there with very fancy leather shoes on. Nowadays, you could probably see this as just a celebrity endorsement, but at this time, many saw this as almost a slap in the face to every blue-collar working person and every person that was drafted into the war. So Dempsey got a lot of massive backlash, even to the point where he had to go to a court battle in 1920, where you can see on the side picture over here with his parents and lawyers fighting against the United States who were accusing him of draft dodging. And for much of Dempsey's career, because of this, he would end up being booed by fans across the United States as being seen as unpatriotic, even when fighting foreign boxers. His next two fights would be KO wins for Dempsey. A third-round KO over Billy Miske in Benton Harbor, Michigan on September 6, 1920, and a 12th-round KO over Bill Brennan in Madison Square Garden, New York City on December 14, 1920. The Miske fight was a quick and decisive victory for Dempsey. And however, the Brennan fight was much longer, with Brennan actually ahead on points with Dempsey badly hurt and bleeding profusely from the left ear before Dempsey knocked him out, which we can see the end of right here. Perhaps what Dempsey is known for most is his next fight against Frenchman Georges Compardier, the Orchid Man. While they were similar heights, Compardier typically fought between 147 and 175 pounds, while Dempsey typically never fought lighter than his 187-pound title fight win against Jess Willard. He was born on January 12th, 1894 in Louvain, France, and was known to be extremely fast and hard-hitting for such a small fighter. During World War I, Compardier was a French Air Force aviator, and during the war, he was awarded 2 of the higher French military honors. And he was already a popular boxer before the war, but this his time in the military bolstered his popularity even more in France as well as England and the United States. Dempsey and Compardier were set to fight on July 2nd, 1923, and this fight was to take place at Boyle's 30 Acres in Jersey City, New Jersey. Dempsey was 6'1", weighed in 190 pounds, and was a world heavyweight champion. Compardier was 5 foot 11 and a half inches and weighed 174 pounds and was the world light heavyweight champion. This was the first world title fight to be broadcast live over the radio and would soon draw the largest crowd of any boxing match at this point. Also, it's interesting to see the difference in promotional material used then versus now. This Saturday, there is a boxing match between YouTube star Jake Paul and the former UFC welterweight champion Tyron Woodley. And you can see in their photos, they're both snarling and trying to look very tough and angry in their demeanors. Yet, the two pictures we have over here, Jack Dempsey in the painting just sort of looks very suave and not exactly very intimidating. And in the fight poster with both Jack and George, both those photos look like yearbook pictures. They definitely don't look like the scary, mean boxers that they actually would have been. Despite this fight being held in the United States with Dempsey as the American champion, Compardier as the war hero and Dempsey as a draft dodger had most fans booing Dempsey and instead chanting for Compardier. The fight was the first ever boxing fight to produce a $1 million in revenue, also known as a $1 million gate. The gate was recorded at $1,789,238 with almost 90,000 people in attendance. This was also the first fight where women were in great attendance, and this was attributed to Compardier being portrayed as a dashing French hero. This was, however, a quick fight, and the promoter of the fight, Tex Rickard, had actually asked Dempsey to go easy on Compardier in the early rounds because he feared an angry mob. In the second round, Dempsey would be rocked by a solid right hand, but he would recuperate and dominate round 3. The fight would end 1 minute and 16 seconds into the 4th round. And here we can see the last moments of the fight with Dempsey dropping Compardier and the ref beginning the count. Compardier would get up right at 9. You can see he'll spring back up to his feet. The fight will be right back on, and then Dempsey will quickly finish it with a body shot. And there we can see a shot showing the massive crowd as Dempsey circled Compardier on the mat. His next fight would be against Tommy Gibbons, and this would not be until a few years later, on July 4th, 1923, in Shelby, Montana. This would be another win for Dempsey via decision after 15 rounds. His next title defense would be against Luis Ángel Firpo, born October 11th, 1894, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and he was nicknamed the Wild Bull of the Pampas being a region in South America where he was from. Firpo was seen as extremely difficult competition for Dempsey, going into their fight with a 19-fight win streak that included KO wins over Dempsey's former opponents, Bill Brennan and Jess Willard. Willard would also retire from boxing after his fight with Firpo. The fight would take place on September 14, 1923, at the Polo Grounds in New York City with 85,000 people in attendance. The fight would only last 57 seconds into the second round, but it would be an electric fight, with the biggest moment happening here with Firpo knocking Dempsey out of the ring. You can see Firpo backing him into the corner, landing a flurry of punches, and then Dempsey flies out of the ring. Thankfully, there was a photographer who caught an image of Dempsey with his feet up in the air as he was falling down. Dempsey, when you're knocked out of the ring, you have 20 seconds to get back in, and Dempsey was able to get back in at around 14 seconds. However, he did suffer a deep cut on the back of his head from falling onto a typewriter. Artist George Wesley Bellows would create a painting immortalizing this moment in 1924, as you can see here. But 57 seconds into the second round, Dempsey would come back and knock Firpo out. This would be Dempsey's fastest title defense. Once Dempsey became world champion, he began to make a lot of money outside of the ring, most notably in the new film industry, with his first role being in Daredevil Jack in 1920. This was a 15-chapter silent film series. And then between the Firpo fight and his next opponent, Dempsey would be in 12 different films, which were mostly shorts. Also in this time, Dempsey was accused of avoiding a lot of fights, specifically with African-American heavyweight contender Harry Willis. Dempsey would fight a number of exhibition bouts around the country at this time, but never put his title on the line. He would also endorse various products like Nuxated Iron, which is like an iron supplement, except they contained almost no iron, but they did contain what we know today as rat poison. So probably not the best thing to be taking. The ad itself was from the Geneva Daily News, July 20th, 1921, right after his win over Carpentier. It was also at this time where Dempsey married his second wife, actress Estelle Taylor. Dempsey's manager, Doc Kearns, always frowned upon him having women in his life or girlfriends and wives. But with Dempsey being in California working in the film industry, Kearns wasn't around to keep him on a short leash, and they were married on February 7th, 1925. Estelle would influence Dempsey to try and take more control over his career, and this would actually ultimately end in Dempsey firing Doc Kearns as his manager and lead promoter. Kearns would end up suing Dempsey over the years for large sums of money from their various business dealings. She would also influence him to get a nose job in 1924, just before their marriage. The newspaper article here says about his nose that is a thing of chaste Grecian beauty. In his autobiography, he states how his trainer at the time was furious with him because of this. His nose would now be weaker, more susceptible to being broken in a fight. He would also potentially be trying to protect it more and fight more defensively. Because of this reason, a lot of fighters today that have messed up noses or ears or anything else will usually wait till their fighting career is done before getting these cosmetic fixes done to them. His next fight would be against James Joseph Jean Tunney, who was born May 25th, 1897 in New York City. Tunney enlisted in the Marine Corps during World War I and served with the 11th Marine Regiment in France and later in Germany. While he served in Europe during the war, he saw no combat, having spent most of his wartime on the Marine boxing team, and he would later join the U.S. Naval Reserve during World War II to help establish a physical fitness program for student pilots. Jean Tunney was known as the Fighting Marine. The fight took place on September 23rd, 1926 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Tunney would win via decision after the 10th round. 120,274 people paid to see this fight, setting a record for paid attendance at a boxing event that would stand for 67 years. Dempsey was actually considered the heavy favorite to win this fight, even though Tunney had only lost one of his previous 82 fights. However, Tunney dominated the entire fight. It was speculated that Dempsey's bodyguard had poisoned him from being paid off by racketeer Arnold Rothstein, as Rothstein had placed a $125,000 bet at 4-1 odds on Tunney to win. The fight was named the upset of the decade by Ring Magazine, and upon heading to the back, Dempsey said to his wife, "Honey, I forgot to duck." This was the same quote borrowed by Ronald Reagan many years later when he suffered his assassination attempt. Dempsey would look for redemption by fighting Jack Sharkey on July 21st, 1927 at Yankee Stadium. This fight would serve as a number one contenders fight to go against Gene Tunney for his new world title. The fight would end in controversy in the 7th round, with Sharkey complaining to the referee that Dempsey was using low blows, and when Sharkey looked away, Dempsey knocked him out. Dempsey versus Tunney 2 would happen on September 22nd, 1927 in Chicago, Illinois, and it would become known to boxing fans as the Long Count. The gate for this fight was $2,658,660 and was the first $2 million gate in entertainment history. In previous fights, when a fighter was knocked down, opponents were allowed to leer over them and strike the fallen opponent once their knees were off the ground, like we had seen in the Jess Willard fight and many of Dempsey's fights before. And this was actually Dempsey's preferred way to fight. However, this fight was the first one conducted under the new rules that are in place today, where a fighter must return to a neutral corner, meaning a corner away from their cornermen, and wait for the referee to do their 10 count. Tunney would win with the first 6 rounds, much like he had before, but in the 7th round, Dempsey would corner Tunney and knock him to the canvas. The first time this had ever happened in Tunney's career. As we see here on this video clip, Tunney is knocked to the ground, and we'll see a timer start. Dempsey, not removing himself to a neutral corner and staying nearby, this doesn't allow the ref to start counting until Tunney was already on the mat for about 4 seconds. Once the count actually starts, we get to the 9 second, and Tunney is still looking at the ref. If he stood up right now, it would be fine. However, Tunney stays on the mat, and then once we get going again, he won't stand up until about 14 seconds have elapsed. However, because the ref didn't actually start his count, he does get up in time to continue the fight. In the 8th round, Tunney would knock Dempsey down, and Tunney began to still crowd him, and the referee started counting right away, which infuriated fans even more. Dempsey would win the next rounds, 9 and 10, but Tunney had done enough to secure another victory. After the fight, Dempsey would raise Tunney's hand and say, "You were best. You fought a smart fight, kid." As film of the fight circled the country more and more, fans became outraged at the decision of the long count. However, Tunney had stated that he picked up the referee's count at around 2, meaning really at 6. So if he stood up at when he should have, he would have been okay. Dempsey, in response to this, said that, quote, "I have no reason to not believe him. Gene's a great guy." Dempsey and Tunney remained good friends into their old age and visit each other often. This would end up being Dempsey's last fight of his career, ending with 64 wins, 6 losses, 9 draws, and 6 no contests. However, he would on occasion have exhibition fights with up-and-coming boxers like future champion Max Baer. He would also go on to continue to be in various films like the 1933 film The Prize Fighter and the Lady, no longer the main star and heartthrob, but playing a supporting role. Dempsey would also manage the Hotel Riviera del Pacifico, built in 1930. It was a hotel and casino in Baja California, about 70 miles south of the U.S. border, and was supposedly financed by Al Capone, one of Dempsey's biggest fans. Unfortunately, it was never a success, as Prohibition ended soon after in 1933, and there was never a good road built to bring people from California down to the hotel. In 1935, Dempsey would also open Jack Dempsey's Broadway restaurant in Manhattan. In its early years, Dempsey was known to hang out and hold court in the restaurant, greeting fans and taking pictures with anybody that wanted. It would eventually close in 1974. Dempsey would divorce his second wife, Estelle Taylor, in 1930 and marry his third wife, Hannah Williams, in 1933. Hannah was also a stage and film actress, singer, and comedian, and they would remain married for 10 years, divorcing in 1943, but not before having 2 daughters, Joan and Barbara. Dempsey would marry his 4th and final wife, Deanna Piatelli, in 1958, and they together would adopt a third daughter. When the United States joined World War II, Dempsey joined the New York State Guard and was given a commission as a first lieutenant. He later resigned from this position and accepted a commission as lieutenant with the Coast Guard Reserve. He reported for duty in June of 1942 at the Coast Guard Training Station in Manhattan Beach, Brooklyn, New York. He was assigned director of physical education and would make personal appearances at fights, camps, hospitals, and war bond drives, and was promoted to commander in March of 1944. He was aboard the USS Arthur Middleton in 1945 for the invasion of Okinawa and was released from active duty in September of 1945 and received an honorable discharge from the reserves in 1952. This was done both as a way for Dempsey to finally serve his country and a way for him to rebuild a little bit of his public persona. Many people after the Tunney fight actually came around and began to love Dempsey and forgave him for the accusations of being a draft dodger. But there was still that stain on his life. So by serving in World War II in this capacity, it sort of helped rebuild his identity. Jack Dempsey is widely regarded as one of the best boxers of all time. In 1954, he was the inaugural inductee to the Ring Magazine's Boxing Hall of Fame and was an inaugural inductee in 1990 to the International Boxing Hall of Fame, as well as various different Hall of Fames all around the world. Champion boxers from today all still credit Jack Dempsey as being a massive influence. Mike Tyson himself also is quoted as saying that Jack Dempsey is one of his favorite boxers, and he maintained close friendships and good relations with many of his former opponents. Here on the screen, we can see, going from left to right, Joe Frazier, the then heavyweight champion, Jack Dempsey, Jack Sharkey, George Carpentier, and Gene Tunney wishing Dempsey a happy 75th birthday in Madison Square Garden in 1970. On May 31st, 1983, Jack Dempsey would die of heart failure at the age of 87 in New York City. Oddly enough, he is buried here in Southampton, New York, in the Southampton Cemetery over on County Road 39. How he ended up in Southampton is still a bit of a mystery. The June 5th, 1983 edition of the New York Times says, quote, Jack Dempsey was buried today, 1 mile from the beach he loved. Unfortunately, there are no beaches within a 1 mile radius of the cemetery. A few miles away, about 3 miles or so south, there's a number of different beaches that could have been this fabled favorite beach of his, but I've been unable to unearth what beach this might have been. So if anybody could tell me, that would be fantastic. But with that is the end of today's talk, recapping the life of Jack Dempsey. If anybody has any questions, comments, if you actually know why he's buried here in Southampton, that would be a great help as well. Please feel free to submit them in the Q&A function or in the chat function. Pulling those up now so I can check for everybody. So let's see, first question I have here. Why are so many boxers Irish? It's a great question. As somebody who is extremely Irish myself, I like to think it's because we have very thick heads, so you can take a punch very well. But at this time, it was when boxing was first starting, it was really big in England, and the United Kingdom in general. So Englishmen, Scots, and Irish were all big boxers. In America, it was an easy way for somebody to make decent money without having any schooling or training. And so a lot of people who were working blue-collar jobs, working in mines, things like that, who became very strong, it was an easy way to make money on the side. So that's probably why a lot of boxers back in the day were Irish immigrants. Let's see, someone else saying, excellent presentation, thank you. Thank you for the kind words. Let's see. Any record of him training in Hampton Bays? Unfortunately, no. I don't believe there's any record of Dempsey himself training in Hampton Bays. John L. Sullivan was the one that trained here in Hampton Bays in the barn by the Canoe Place Inn. But Dempsey himself, I believe, just came to visit. I looked around a lot to try and find information of him training here. But when Dempsey really fell in love with New York and moved out here, it was after his prime as a boxer. He spent most of his time living in the Midwest or in California while he was champion and at the height of his career. He didn't come to New York City until he had, I think, either fully retired or just before his retirement. Let's see. Yeah, somebody else said the poor became boxers. Irish, Jewish, Black, and Hispanic, which is very true. There were a lot of Jewish boxers as well. Max Baer, who I mentioned in my talk, was a Jewish boxer who was extremely prevalent, and who, when I was doing research for this, I kind of fell down a rabbit hole of just researching him. And I was trying to find a Southampton connection so I could talk about him more, but I don't think there was any, or maybe a small one. Let's see. Do you think Sullivan should have a historic marker? I think so. It would be really interesting for that barn to have some kind of marker, some kind of designation showing that. Be really cool to throw a big boxing ring in there, but I've been inside. I don't know if there's room anymore. But yeah, I think a small placard would be really cool and interesting to have over there. Let's see. Any questions in the chat? Don't think so. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining me today. Oh, somebody's saying, how long did you research this for? Well, I think I got the assignment to do the lecture a few months ago. And so I've been doing a little bit of research on and off, but I'm also a fan of boxing and mixed martial arts and combat sports in general. So I had a vague knowledge of most of this beforehand. So it's easy to talk a lot about stuff that you actually like. So that's very helpful. But without any other questions coming in, I want to thank everybody for joining me today. If you did like this talk and you want to join us for any of our future lectures, again, this was part of our series, the Southampton History Museum and Amagansett Library present the 20th Century Influencers. If you go to our website, southamptonhistory.org/20C, you will see all of our future talks, with our next one being about Larry Rivers on January 27th. That is a Thursday at 11 a.m. And I want to thank everyone again for joining us. Have a good day.